Dan Cooper wiped the sawdust from his hands and checked the time on his workshop display. 6:30. He had exactly 1 hour before Patricia arrived to drag him to this ridiculous blind date. He looked down at the half-finished chair on his workbench and wondered if he could pretend to be sick. The orbital station New Seattle hummed around him, a constant reminder that he lived in a metal cylinder floating in space. But his workshop smelled like earthwood, real wood shipped at enormous cost from the home planet. It was his one luxury, his connection to something solid and real. "Dad, you better start getting ready." Lily appeared in the doorway, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail just like her mother used to wear it. She was 12 now, growing taller every month, and far too smart for her own good. "I'm thinking about canceling," Dan said, not looking up from his work. "You can't. Aunt Patricia will kill you. She's been planning this for weeks." Dan sighed. Patricia meant well. His late wife's sister had been helping him raise Lily for the past 4 years, ever since the plague took half the colony where they'd been living. Patricia thought he needed to move on, to find someone new. Dan wasn't sure he agreed. "What do you know about this woman anyway?" Dan asked. Lily pulled out her tablet and started reading. Commander Diana Cross, 40 years old, decorated officer in the Human Defense Fleet. She won the Battle of Kepler's Gate last year, saved 3 colony worlds from the Vraxian attack. They call her the Dragon Lady. That's supposed to make me feel better? She sounds amazing, Lily said, her eyes bright. "I'm doing my school project on her. Did you know she destroyed 12 enemy ships without losing a single crew member? Wonderful. I'm going on a date with someone who kills people for a living. She protects people, Dad. There's a difference." Dan knew his daughter was right, but it didn't change how he felt. Military types were all the same in his experience. Cold, efficient, and about as warm as the vacuum outside the station walls. He'd had enough of war and death. He just wanted to build things, raise his daughter, and live quietly. An hour later, Dan stood in front of his bathroom mirror, adjusting his collar for the 3rd time. He'd chosen simple clothes, a dark blue shirt, and black pants. Nothing fancy. Patricia had told him the restaurant was upscale, but he wasn't trying to impress anyone. "You look good, Dad," Lily said from his bedroom doorway. "I look like I'm going to a funeral." "Don't be dramatic. Just be yourself. Maybe she'll be nice." Patricia arrived right on time, dressed in her usual bright colors. She took one look at Dan and shook her head. "You look like you're about to face a firing squad." "That's how I feel. Daniel Cooper, you promised me you'd give this a real chance. Diana is a wonderful woman. Strong, intelligent, accomplished. And she agreed to this date as a favor to me. So don't embarrass me. How do you even know her? We served together years ago, before I left the military. Now come on, we're going to be late." The restaurant was called Starlight Views, perched on the observation deck of the station where diners could watch the stars while they ate. Dan had passed by it dozens of times but never gone inside. It was the kind of place where a single meal cost more than he made in a day. Patricia led him to a table by the massive viewport. A woman sat there already, and Dan's first thought was that she looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. She wore her dress uniform, dark blue with silver insignia covering her chest. Her auburn hair was pulled back so tightly it must have hurt. Her face was all sharp angles and hard lines. "Diana, this is my brother-in-law, Dan Cooper. Dan, this is Commander Diana Cross." Diana stood and extended her hand. Her grip was firm, almost crushing. "Mr. Cooper, Patricia has told me about you." "Just Dan, please. And she's told me about you too." They sat down, and Patricia excused herself quickly, leaving them alone. An awkward silence fell over the table. "So," Diana said finally, "Patricia tells me you're a carpenter." "That's right. I build furniture mostly. Some repair work on the habitat modules when they need it." "Interesting. Rather old-fashioned profession in this age of molecular fabricators." Dan felt his jaw tighten. "Some people still appreciate handmade things. I didn't mean to offend." It's just unusual. Most civilian contractors work in programming or systems design. I work with my hands. I like making things that last. Diana nodded, but didn't seem particularly interested. She spent the next 10 minutes discussing troop movements, supply lines, and strategic positions. Dan tried to follow along, but military jargon wasn't his language. When their food arrived, Diana critiqued the restaurant's layout. Inefficient design. The kitchen should be centralized, not split across 2 levels. And these tables are too close together. In an emergency evacuation, people would panic and create bottlenecks. Do you always think about emergencies? Dan asked. Always. It's my job to anticipate problems before they happen. Must be exhausting. It's necessary. The Vraxian collective doesn't take breaks. Neither can we. Dan tried changing the subject. Do you have any hobbies? Things you do when you're not working? Diana looked at him blankly. I train. I study tactical manuals. I review fleet performance data. So you don't have hobbies. My work is important, Mr. Cooper. While you're carving wood, people are dying on the frontier. Someone has to protect them. The comment stung more than Diana probably intended. Dan's wife had died protecting people too, treating plague victims when she could have evacuated. He didn't need a lecture about sacrifice from someone who thought carpentry was quaint. You know what? Dan said, standing up. I need to use the restroom. Excuse me. He walked toward the back of the restaurant, past the other diners with their romantic meals and quiet conversations. But instead of turning toward the restrooms, he found the service entrance. A tired-looking waiter was taking a break, and Dan slipped past him into the corridor beyond. He felt guilty for about 30 seconds. Then he thought about sitting through another hour of Diana Cross, explaining why everything in the universe could be improved with military precision. And the guilt faded. Patricia would be angry, but she'd get over it. Dan made his way back to his apartment, a small 2-bedroom unit in the civilian section of the station. Lily was still awake, working on her tablet at the kitchen table. She looked up in surprise when he walked in. Dad? You're back early. How was the date? Short, Dan said, pulling off his jacket. It didn't work out. What happened? She's just not my type, sweetheart. Too rigid, too focused on work. Honestly, she seemed more like a machine than a person. Lily frowned. That doesn't sound like the Commander Cross I've been researching. She saved thousands of lives at Kepler's Gate. I'm sure she's very good at her job. But that doesn't mean we'd be compatible. Some people just don't fit together. Did you even try to get to know her? Dan poured himself a glass of water, avoiding his daughter's eyes. I tried enough. Trust me. It wouldn't have worked. Now go finish your homework and get ready for bed. Lily didn't move. You walked out on her, didn't you? Lily. You did. Dad, that's so rude. What would Mom say? That hit harder than Dan wanted to admit. His wife would have been disappointed in him. She'd always believed in giving people fair chances, in looking past surface impressions. But she wasn't here anymore, and he was tired of trying to live up to her memory. Your mom would understand that some people aren't meant to be together. Now please, go to bed. We'll talk about this tomorrow. Lily gathered her tablet and stood up, but she stopped in the doorway to her room. I think you made a mistake, Dad. But okay. Good night. After she left, Dan sat alone in his kitchen, staring out the small viewport at the stars beyond. Somewhere out there, Diana Cross was probably still sitting in that restaurant, or maybe she'd left too. He wondered if she was angry or relieved. He told himself it didn't matter. They were too different. She lived in a world of warfare and strategy. He lived in a world of wood grain and joints. There was no bridge between those worlds. Dan finished his water and went to bed, certain he'd never see the Dragon Lady again. He had no way of knowing how wrong he was. 3 days passed before Dan heard anything about the disastrous date. Patricia called him twice, but he let the messages go to voicemail. He knew he'd been rude, and he'd apologize eventually. Just not yet. He was in his workshop, sanding down a table leg when Lily burst through the door waving her tablet. "Dad, you won't believe this. The school messed up my career day assignment." Dan looked up from his work. "What do you mean?" "I was supposed to shadow engineer Karen Price at the water recycling plant. But there was some kind of computer error. And now I'm assigned to shadow Commander Diana Cross at Sentinel Prime instead." Dan nearly dropped his sanding block. "What? No. Absolutely not. Why not? This is amazing. I'll get to see a real military command center. Do you know how rare that is? For a civilian?" "Lily, I walked out on that woman 3 days ago. You can't go follow her around after what I did." "But Dad, this is for school. They already sent the confirmation. If I don't go, it'll affect my grade." Dan set down his tools and pulled out his own tablet, scrolling through Lily's school messages. Sure enough, there it was. Due to a scheduling conflict, several students had been reassigned. Lily Cooper was now assigned to Commander Diana Cross, Defense Station Sentinel Prime. Tomorrow, at 08:00 hours. "This is Patricia's doing," Dan muttered. "She's trying to force us back together. Even if she is, I still have to go. Please, Dad. This is for my project. Commander Cross is a hero. I want to meet her." Dan looked at his daughter's eager face and felt his resolve weakening. Lily had been obsessed with this project for weeks, reading everything she could find about humanity's war heroes. Diana Cross was at the top of her list. "Fine," he said finally, "but I'm coming with you." "What? Dad?" "No. That'll be so embarrassing. I have security clearance for military stations. I've done repair work on Sentinel Prime before. If you're going, I'm going. That's final." Lily rolled her eyes but nodded. "Okay, fine. But please don't make it weird." The next morning, they took a shuttle from New Seattle to Sentinel Prime. The defense station was 3 times the size of their home station, bristling with weapons and sensor arrays. Ships came and went constantly, fighters and cruisers moving in careful patterns around the massive structure. They were met at the dock by a young officer who introduced himself as Lieutenant Greg Shaw. He looked nervous. "Mr. Cooper? Miss Cooper? Commander Cross is expecting you. Please follow me." They walked through corridors filled with military personnel, all moving with purpose and discipline. Dan felt out of place in his civilian clothes, aware of the stares from passing soldiers. Lily, on the other hand, couldn't stop looking around with wide eyes. Lieutenant Shaw led them to a briefing room, where Diana Cross stood studying a holographic display of ship positions. She wore her working uniform today, less formal than the dress uniform from their date. Her hair was still pulled back tight. She turned when they entered, and her expression flickered with surprise when she saw Dan. "Mr. Cooper, I didn't realize you'd be joining us." "I go where my daughter goes," Dan said stiffly. "Of course. And you must be Lily." Diana focused on his daughter, and her face softened slightly. "Patricia has told me about you. She says you're doing a project on the Frontier Wars." "Yes, ma'am. Commander Cross, I mean. I've read all about the Battle of Kepler's Gate. It was brilliant strategy." Something in Diana's face changed when Lily mentioned the battle. The hardness crept back in. It was necessary. "Come. I'll show you around the station." For the next 2 hours, Diana gave them a complete tour. She showed Lily the bridge, where officers monitored dozens of screens tracking ship movements across the sector. She explained the fighter bays, where pilots prepared for rapid deployment. She walked them through the Strategic Operations Center, where analysts predicted enemy movements and planned defensive responses. Dan had to admit, grudgingly, that Diana was good with Lily. She didn't talk down to her. She answered every question seriously, explaining complex military concepts in ways a 12-year-old could understand. She even demonstrated some of the tactical simulations, letting Lily try her hand at commanding a small fleet. "You have good instincts," Diana told her, after Lily successfully defended a convoy from simulated raiders. "You think 3 moves ahead. That's rare." Lily beamed. My dad taught me to play chess. He says you always have to think about what comes next. Diana glanced at Dan. Smart advice. They stopped for lunch in the officers' mess. Diana mostly listened as Lily peppered her with questions about ship types, weapon systems, and battle tactics. Dan stayed quiet, watching the way Diana's stern expression would occasionally crack into something almost like a smile when Lily said something particularly enthusiastic. Can I ask you something personal, Commander? Lily said between bites of food. You can ask. I may not answer. Why do they call you the Dragon Lady? Dan winced, but Diana just nodded like she'd expected the question. My subordinates started calling me that after Kepler's Gate. They say I breathe fire when I'm angry. That I'm ruthless with anyone who doesn't meet my standards. Are you? Yes. When lives depend on everyone doing their job perfectly, there's no room for mistakes. Some people see that as being cold. Maybe they're right. My mom was like that, Lily said quietly. She was a doctor. She was really strict with her staff because people's lives depended on them. But she wasn't cold. She just cared a lot. Diana was quiet for a moment. Your father told me about your mother. I'm sorry for your loss. It's okay. Well, not okay. But you know, Dad says she died protecting people. That's what you do too. Right? Protect people? I try. They were finishing lunch when the alarm started blaring. Every officer in the mess hall jumped to their feet. Diana's tablet lit up with urgent messages. Vraxian Scout Force just emerged from subspace, Diana said, already moving toward the door. 3 warships, testing our defenses. Lieutenant Shaw, get the Coopers to the civilian shelter. Now. Wait, Lily said, her voice suddenly small. Are we under attack? The station shuddered as something impacted the outer shields. The lights flickered. Dan grabbed Lily's hand. It's okay, sweetheart. We just need to get to safety. CSF, Alabin, but Lily wasn't moving. Her face had gone pale, and Dan recognized the look. She was having a flashback to the colony, to the day her mother died. The sirens there had sounded just like this. Lily, come on. Dan tried to pull her, but she was frozen. Diana noticed. She stopped at the doorway and came back, kneeling down in front of Lily, despite the urgent messages streaming across her tablet. Hey, she said softly. Lily's eyes were unfocused, but they shifted to Diana's face. I need you to listen carefully. I know you're scared. That's okay. Fear is natural. The first time I was in combat, I was so terrified I couldn't breathe. But you know what I learned? Lily shook her head slightly. Fear means you're smart enough to understand danger. But you're also smart enough to know what to do next. Right now, the next thing is to go with your dad to the shelter. Can you do that for me? What if something happens to you? Lily whispered. Diana's expression softened in a way Dan hadn't thought possible. I've been doing this for 20 years. I'm very good at staying alive, and I'm going to make sure this station stays safe. That's a promise. But I need you safe first, so I can focus on my job. Okay? Lily nodded slowly. Diana squeezed her shoulder once, then stood and nodded to Lieutenant Shaw. Take care of them. That's your only priority. Shaw led them quickly through the corridors as more alarms sounded. Other civilians were moving toward the shelters, some frightened, others grimly used to these drills. The station shook again, harder this time. The civilian shelter was a reinforced section deep in the station's core. Emergency supplies lined the walls. Families huddled together on benches. Screens mounted near the ceiling showed the battle unfolding outside. Dan held Lily close as they watched Diana's fleet engage the Vraxian ships. Each twice the size of the largest human cruiser, traded fire with Diana's defense force. The tactical display showed ship positions, weapons, fire, and shield status. Diana's voice came through the speakers, calm and clear despite the chaos. She was directing her ships with precision, calling out maneuvers and targets. Dan didn't understand half the military terms, but he could see the pattern forming. She wasn't just fighting. She was conducting a symphony of destruction, moving her ships like chess pieces. Every time the Vraxians tried to press an advantage, they found themselves caught in a crossfire. Every time they tried to retreat, Diana's forces cut off their escape routes. But what struck Dan most was how Diana positioned her flagship. She placed it between the enemy and the station's residential sections. When the Vraxians launched missiles toward the civilian areas, Diana's ship took the hits on its shields, protecting the people behind it. "She's putting herself in danger," someone near Dan muttered. "The commander's shields are at 60%. She's protecting us," Lily said, her fear replaced by awe. The battle lasted 23 minutes. When it ended, all 3 Vraxian ships were retreating back into subspace, damaged and outmaneuvered. Diana's fleet hadn't lost a single vessel. The all-clear sounded, and people began filing out of the shelter. Dan expected Diana to return to her command duties, but 15 minutes later, she appeared in the shelter entrance, still in her combat-stained uniform. She was checking on the civilians personally, moving from family to family, making sure everyone was okay. When she reached Dan and Lily, there was exhaustion in her eyes that hadn't been there before. "You're both all right?" she asked. "We're fine," Dan said. Lily launched herself forward and hugged Diana. The commander stiffened in surprise, clearly not used to physical contact. But after a moment, she carefully put one hand on Lily's head. "You kept your promise," Lily said. "You kept us safe. That's my job." "No," Lily said, pulling back to look up at Diana. "Lots of commanders would have just fought the battle. You made sure we were okay first. That's different." Diana didn't seem to know what to say to that. She looked at Dan, and he saw something in her face he hadn't seen during their date. Vulnerability. Real human emotion beneath the military armor. "Listen," Dan heard himself say. "Would you like to come to dinner tonight? At our place? Nothing fancy. Just a thank you for keeping us safe." Diana hesitated. "I have reports to file. Damage assessments. Those can wait an hour," Dan said. "You have to eat anyway." "Please, Commander," Lily added. "I want to hear more about your career. For my project." Diana looked between them, and slowly, she nodded. "All right, but only for an hour." Diana arrived at their apartment exactly on time, which didn't surprise Dan at all. What did surprise him was that she'd changed out of her uniform into civilian clothes. She wore simple dark pants and a gray sweater, and her hair hung loose around her shoulders instead of pulled back in that severe bun. She looked younger somehow, less like the dragon lady and more like a regular person. "Come in," Dan said, stepping aside. "Sorry about the mess. We weren't expecting company today." "It's not messy," Diana said, looking around the small living space. Her eyes landed on the wooden furniture, clearly handmade. "Did you build all of this?" "Most of it. The couch, the table, the shelves. That rocking chair was the first piece I made after we moved here." Diana walked over to the chair and ran her hand along its arm. "The grain is beautiful. What kind of wood?" Oak. Real earth oak. Not synthetic. Cost me 3 months' pay to have it shipped here. But it was worth it. I can see why. It's remarkable." She paused, still touching the chair. "I apologize for what I said at dinner the other night. About your work being old-fashioned. This is art." Dan felt some of his resentment from that evening fade. "Thank you." Lily emerged from her room, freshly showered and wearing her favorite shirt. "I said I would. And when we're not on duty, you can call me Diana." "Really?" Diana glanced at Dan, who shrugged. "Go ahead. I need to finish cooking anyway." He left them in the living room and returned to the kitchen, where he'd been preparing a simple meal. Nothing fancy, just pasta with vegetables and sauce he'd made from scratch. Through the doorway, he could hear Lily excitedly showing Diana her research. This is the tactical breakdown of Kepler's gate. I studied all the ship movements. You used the asteroid field to split their fleet, then attacked from 2 directions at once. That's right. The Vraxians expected us to retreat. They didn't anticipate an offensive move. But you lost ships too. The destroyer Courage and the frigate Morning Star. There was a long pause. Dan glanced into the living room and saw Diana's face had closed off again. Yes, Diana said quietly. We lost those ships. 347 crew members total. I'm sorry, Lily said. That must have been hard. It was necessary. If we hadn't stopped them there, they would have reached the colony worlds. Millions would have died instead of hundreds, but you still remember them. The people who died. Another pause. Every single one. I keep a list of names in my quarters. I read them sometimes, to remind myself what my decisions cost. Dan stopped stirring the sauce. He hadn't expected that. The Dragon Lady, ruthless and efficient. Keeping a memorial list of her fallen soldiers. My mom kept a list too, Lily said softly. Of all her patients who died from the plague. She said it was important to remember them as people, not just numbers. Your mother sounds like she was a wise woman. She was. I miss her a lot. I'm sure you do. Losing a parent is hard. Did you ever lose someone close to you? Dan almost went into the living room to stop Lily from prying into Diana's personal life, but something made him wait. My younger brother, Diana said. His name was Carl. He was 16 when the Vraxians raided the mining station where our family lived. I was 20, away at the academy. By the time the fleet arrived, everyone was dead. Is that why you joined the military? I was already enlisted. But yes, that's why I stayed. Why I dedicated everything to stopping them. I couldn't save my brother, but maybe I could save someone else's brother, someone else's family. That's what you did today. You saved us. Dan heard the emotion in Diana's voice when she replied, I'm glad I could. When those alarms went off and I saw the fear on your face, all I could think about was Carl, about how terrified he must have been. I couldn't let that happen to you. Dan decided it was time to interrupt before things got too heavy. He carried the food into the living room and set it on the table. Dinner's ready. Hope you like pasta. Dot. 1. Ah. Dot. Dot. They sat down together, and Dan was struck by how strange the scene was. 3 days ago, he'd walked out on this woman in a restaurant. Now she was sitting at his table, eating his food, and talking with his daughter like they were old friends. This is delicious, Diana said after the first bite. Did you make the sauce yourself? From actual tomatoes. Another expensive import, but worth it. I can't stand the synthetic stuff. I usually eat in the officer's mess. Everything comes from the fabricators. I'd forgotten what real food tastes like. Doan. Ada. Doan. You should learn to cook, Lily suggested. My dad taught me. It's fun. Diana smiled slightly. I'm not sure I'd be any good at it. I tend to follow procedures exactly, which apparently isn't how cooking works. That's exactly how baking works, Dan said. Precise measurements, specific temperatures, exact timing. You'd probably be good at it. They ate and talked, and Dan watched Diana gradually relax. Her shoulders lowered. Her face softened. She even laughed once when Lily told a story about a disastrous school science experiment. After dinner, Lily excused herself to finish homework, leaving Dan and Diana alone. They moved to the couch, and Diana looked around the apartment again. You've built a good life here, she said. A home. That's something I've never really had. What do you mean? Don't you have quarters on Sentinel Prime? I have a room, a bed, a desk, a closet for my uniforms. But it's not a home. It's just a place I sleep between shifts. You could make it more than that. Add some personal touches. Diana shook her head. I wouldn't know where to start. I've been in the military for 22 years. I've moved stations 17 times. I learned not to get attached to places. What about people? The question came out before Dan could stop himself. Diana looked at him, and there was something sad in her eyes. I've learned not to get attached to them either. It's easier that way. When you lose people, and you will lose people, it hurts less if you kept them at a distance. That sounds lonely. It is. But it's safer. Dan thought about his own isolation. How he'd been keeping people at arm's length since his wife died. How he'd walked out on this dinner date, rather than risk connection. He and Diana weren't so different. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "At that restaurant, were you trying to push me away? Talking about work? Criticizing everything?" Diana was quiet for a moment, then nodded. "Patricia told me about your wife, about how much you loved her. I thought it would be easier for both of us if the date ended quickly. If you didn't like me, you wouldn't feel guilty about moving on. That's why you were so cold." "I'm always cold, Dan. It's who I am. I don't know how to be anything else." "I don't think that's true. Today, with Lily, when she was scared, you weren't cold. You were kind and gentle, and exactly what she needed." Diana looked away. "Children are different. They deserve kindness. And adults don't? Adults should be able to handle the truth. Children still deserve hope." Dan reached out and took her hand without thinking. She stiffened, but didn't pull away. "You deserve hope too," he said. "You deserve more than a room with a desk and a list of dead soldiers. I don't know how to have more than that. Maybe you could learn. The same way you learned tactics and strategy." Diana finally looked at him, and there was something vulnerable in her expression. "I'm not good at personal connections, Dan. I don't do relationships well. I work too much. I'm too focused on the mission. I've tried before, and it never works. Maybe you were trying with the wrong people, or maybe I'm the problem." Dan squeezed her hand. "Today, you put your ship between enemy fire and a bunch of civilians you'd never met. You personally checked every shelter after the battle. You kept a promise to a scared 12-year-old girl. That doesn't sound like someone who can't connect to people. That's duty. That's different. Is it? Because from where I was sitting, it looked like you actually cared." Diana was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I was terrified during that battle. Not for myself. I've faced worse odds. But knowing Lily was down in that shelter, knowing any of those missiles could have gotten through, I've never been that scared while commanding a fleet. I couldn't stop thinking about my brother. About your daughter going through what he went through. But she didn't. Because of you. This time. But there will be other battles. Other attacks. I can't always be there to protect her. No, nobody can always be there. My wife couldn't protect herself from the plague, no matter how good a doctor she was. We do what we can, and we hope it's enough." Diana finally turned to look at him fully. "How do you do it? How do you keep going after losing someone you loved? Honestly? Some days I don't. Some days I just go through the motions. But Lily keeps me grounded. She gives me a reason to build things, instead of just existing. And lately..." He paused. "Lately I've been thinking that maybe closing myself off isn't the answer. Maybe the people we lost would want us to keep living, keep connecting, keep caring about things. That's terrifying. Yeah, it is. But so is being alone forever." They sat together in comfortable silence for a while, still holding hands. Through the wall, they could hear Lily's music playing softly in her room. "I should go," Diana said eventually. "I really do have reports to file." "Okay. But maybe you could come back? For dinner again?" "Lily would love it." "Just Lily?" Dan smiled. "No, not just Lily." Diana stood, and Dan walked her to the door. She paused before leaving. "Thank you for giving me another chance. After I was so awful at that restaurant. Thank you for keeping us safe today. And for being kind to my daughter. She's easy to be kind to. She reminds me of Carl. Smart, curious, Brave even when she's scared. He would have liked you too, I think. Diana smiled. A real, genuine smile that transformed her face. Good night, Dan. Good night, Dan. Good night, Diana. After she left, Dan stood at the door for a moment, processing everything. Lily emerged from her room with a knowing look on her face. So, she said, she's pretty great, isn't she? Don't start. I'm just saying. She risked her life for us today. She cares about you. And she's not cold, Dad. She's just scared. Like you. Dan looked at his too-smart daughter. When did you get so wise? Mom always said I took after you. And you're the one who taught me that people are like wood. Sometimes the surface looks rough, but underneath, there's something beautiful. I did say that, didn't I? Yep. So maybe you should take your own advice. Dan pulled Lily into a hug. Maybe I should. Over the next month, Diana became a regular presence in their lives. She came for dinner twice a week when her schedule allowed, sometimes in uniform straight from shift, sometimes in the civilian clothes she was slowly acquiring. She always brought something, usually expensive treats from the station commissary that she claimed she'd been given and didn't want to waste. Dan suspected she was buying them, but he never called her on it. Lily was delighted. She'd found a hero who was willing to answer endless questions about fleet tactics and space combat. But Dan noticed that Diana also asked questions back, wanting to know about Lily's school projects, her friends, her interests beyond military history. One evening, Diana arrived earlier than usual and found Dan in his workshop. He was carefully shaping a piece of cherry wood, working on what would become a jewelry box for a client on the upper levels. Am I interrupting? Diana asked from the doorway. Not at all. Come in. Just let me finish this cut. Diana entered the workshop, looking around at the tools hanging on the walls. The smell of fresh sawdust. The half-finished projects on various benches. She picked up a small, carved bird that Dan had made for Lily years ago. This is beautiful. You made this? When Lily was 8, she wanted a pet, but we couldn't keep animals on the station, so I made her a whole collection of wooden creatures instead. Can I watch you work? Sure. Pull up that stool. Diana sat down and watched as Dan worked the wood, his hands steady and sure. He explained what he was doing as he went, talking about grain direction, wood moisture, the way different species responded to different tools. It seems peaceful, Diana said after a while. Creating something with your hands. It is. It's the opposite of destruction. Every piece of wood has potential. You just have to find it and bring it out. I wouldn't know where to start. Dan set down his current project and pulled out a piece of smooth pine and a sheet of sandpaper. Here. Start simple. Just sand this until it's perfectly smooth. That's it? That's it. Steady pressure. Move with the grain. Be patient. Diana took the wood and sandpaper, studying them like they were tactical displays. Then she started sanding, hard and fast. Gentler, Dan said. You're fighting it. Let the paper do the work. She adjusted her pressure but kept the quick pace. After 5 minutes, the wood was scratched and uneven. This is harder than it looks, she admitted. Most worthwhile things are. Here, let me show you. Dan moved behind her, placing his hands over hers, guiding her movements. Feel the rhythm? Slow and steady. You can't force wood to cooperate. You have to work with it. He felt Diana tense at the physical contact, then gradually relax. Together, they sanded the wood in long, smooth strokes. Better? He asked. Yes, I think I understand now. Dan stepped back, and Diana continued on her own. Her movements were more controlled now, more patient. After another 10 minutes, the wood was noticeably smoother. Not bad for your first try, Dan said. Diana held up the wood, examining it. It's not perfect. Nothing ever is on the first attempt. That's why we keep practicing. Something in his words seemed to resonate with her. She looked at the wood, then at him. Is this a metaphor? Maybe. I find woodworking has a lot of lessons that apply to life, such as patience, attention to detail, Understanding that different materials need different approaches. Knowing when to apply pressure and when to ease off. Accepting that mistakes happen and learning to work with them instead of against them. Diana smiled. You're talking about more than wood now. Am I? She stood up, still holding the pine board. Can I keep this? As a reminder? Of what? That I can learn new things. That not everything in life has to be about combat efficiency and tactical precision. You can keep it, but only if you come back and practice some more. Deal. From that day on, Diana spent her free time in Dan's workshop. She was terrible at woodworking initially, too forceful and impatient. But she was determined, and slowly, she improved. Dan found himself looking forward to those sessions, watching her concentration as she focused on sanding or cutting, seeing her frustration when something went wrong, and her quiet satisfaction when it went right. Lily teased them mercilessly. She'd walk past the workshop, see them working side by side, and make exaggerated sighing sounds. Dan would throw sawdust at her, and she'd laugh and run away. One evening, about 6 weeks after the battle, Dan received a message that changed everything. It was from Vincent Hayes, owner of the luxury liner Star Princess. He wanted custom furniture for his ship's high-end suites, a 6-month contract with pay that was 3 times Dan's usual rate. The catch was that the work had to be done on-site. Traveling with the liner, as it toured the safer sectors, far from the frontier. It meant leaving New Seattle, leaving the war zones, giving Lily the safe, peaceful childhood Dan had always wanted for her. He sat at his kitchen table, staring at the contract on his tablet. It was everything he'd hoped for. Security, safety, good money. A chance to get Lily away from battle alarms and Vraxian raids. What's wrong, Dad? Lily asked, coming into the kitchen. Nothing's wrong. Actually, something's really right. I got offered a big job, building furniture for a luxury liner. That's great. It would mean leaving the station, living on the ship for 6 months, but we'd be far from the fighting. You'd be safe. Lily's smile faded. 6 months? What about school? They have schools on ships like that. Better ones than here. Probably. And the pay is amazing. We could save up, maybe get a place on one of the core worlds when the contract's done. What about Diana? Dan had been avoiding thinking about that. She'd understand. She'd want you to be safe. Would she? Or would she be sad that we left? Lily, Diana's job is protecting the frontier. She'll be here doing that whether we're here or not. But she won't have us. She won't have dinner twice a week, or come work in your shop. She'll be alone again. Dan didn't have an answer for that. 2 days later, he still hadn't decided when Diana came for dinner. She noticed his distraction immediately. Something's bothering you, she said, after Lily went to bed. Dan told her about the offer. As he spoke, he watched her face, looking for a reaction. She kept her expression neutral. That's a wonderful opportunity, she said when he finished. You should take it. You think so? Of course. Lily would be away from the danger. You'd be doing prestigious work. It's exactly what you need. What about you? Diana looked away. What about me? Would you miss us? That's not relevant to your decision. Yes, it is. Diana, these past weeks, I thought we were building something here. Not just friendship. Something more. We are friends. That doesn't mean you should make life decisions based on me. Why not? I make decisions based on Lily. On what's best for our family. And lately, I've been thinking maybe you're part of that. Diana stood up abruptly. Dan, don't. We both know this doesn't have a future. I'm military. I'm married to my job. You deserve better than someone who might not come home from the next battle. That's an excuse. It's reality. I've seen too many military relationships fail. The deployments, the danger, the constant worry. It's not fair to ask that of anyone. What if I'm willing to accept that risk? But what about Lily? She's already lost one parent. How fair is it to let her get attached to someone who fights for a living? Dan stood too, frustrated. So we're just supposed to walk away? Pretend these past weeks didn't happen? I'm saying you should take this job and give your daughter the safe, stable life she deserves. That's what a good father does. A good father teaches his daughter not to run from things that matter, not to hide from connection because she's afraid of losing people. Diana's voice went cold, her dragon lady persona sliding back into place. I'm not hiding. I'm not hiding. Yes, you are. You're hiding behind duty and danger and every other excuse you can find. Because you're scared. 1. I have every right to be scared. People I care about die, Dan. My brother died. My crew members die. I won't put you and Lily through that. Too late. We already care about you. Running away doesn't change that. Diana headed for the door. Take the job, Dan. Give Lily the future she deserves. After she left, Dan sat alone in the dark living room. He heard Lily's door open, knew she'd been listening. Dad? Yeah, sweetheart. Are you going to take the job? Dan thought about safety and money and everything he'd wanted for his daughter. Then, he thought about Diana's smile when she successfully finished sanding a piece of wood, about the way she'd kept them safe during the battle, about how lonely she looked when she talked about her quarters being just a room, not a home. No, he said. I'm not taking it. Lily came and sat next to him. Because of Diana? Because of us. Because I've been so focused on keeping you safe from danger that I forgot to teach you how to live. Your mother didn't hide from the plague. She fought it, even knowing the risk. Maybe we should honor her memory by being brave, too. Diana needs us, Lily said quietly. Yeah, I think she does. And maybe we need her, too. So, what are we going to do? Tomorrow, I'm going to turn down that job. Then I'm going to go find Diana and tell her she's worth the risk. That we're all worth the risk. What if she still pushes you away? Then I'll keep trying. Your mom taught me that the best things in life are worth fighting for. Diana's spent her whole life fighting for others. Maybe it's time someone fought for her. Fighting for. Lily hugged him. Mom would like her, you know. She'd say Diana's stubborn and brave, and exactly what we need. Dan hugged his daughter back, surprised by how much he needed to hear that. Yeah, I think she would. God. The next morning, Dan sent his refusal to Vincent Hayes. Then he headed to Sentinel Prime to find Diana. The station guards knew him by now and waved him through. He made his way to the command center where Diana spent most of her time. She was studying tactical displays when he entered. She looked up, surprised and guarded. Dan, what are you doing here? I turned down the job. Her face went pale. What? Why would you do that? Because leaving would be running away. From danger, from uncertainty, from you. And I'm done running. Dan, I told you. I know what you told me. Now let me tell you something. You're right that caring about people is scary. That losing them hurts. But you know what's scarier? Living your whole life afraid to connect. Dying alone because you were too afraid to let anyone in. This isn't fair. Life isn't fair. Your brother died. My wife died. Bad things happen whether we take risks or hide. The question is, what kind of life do we want to have while we're here? Diana looked at him, and her defenses were crumbling. I don't know how to do this. How to be someone's partner when my job is what it is. Then we'll figure it out together. One day at a time. Just like learning woodworking. Steady pressure, moving with the grain, being patient. Despite everything, Diana smiled. You and your carpentry metaphors. They work, don't they? She crossed the distance between them. And for the first time, she let herself be vulnerable. I'm terrified, Dan. Of losing you. Of failing you. And Lily. Join the club. I'm terrified too. But I'd rather be terrified with you than safe without you. Diana reached up and touched his face, gentle despite her warrior's hands. You kept us safe. You learned to sand wood. You showed my daughter that being strong doesn't mean being alone. He covered her hand with his. And now, you're letting yourself be human. That's more than enough. She kissed him then. And it felt like coming home. 3 months passed in something close to happiness. Diana and Dan navigated their relationship carefully, learning each other's rhythms and boundaries. She came to dinner 4 nights a week now, sometimes staying late, teaching Lily about star navigation while Dan cleaned up the kitchen. On weekends, she'd spend hours in his workshop, slowly improving her woodworking skills while he worked on commissions. The station community adjusted to the sight of the dragon lady covered in sawdust, holding hands with the quiet Carpenter. Some people gossiped, but most accepted it as one of those strange wartime romances that seemed to happen when normal rules didn't apply. Patricia took full credit, naturally. She'd known they'd be perfect together. She said every chance she got. Dan and Diana would roll their eyes, but secretly, they were grateful. Lily thrived with Diana in their lives. She had a role model who was brilliant and strong, but also willing to admit mistakes and fears. Diana helped with her homework, took her to the observation decks to watch fleet maneuvers, and listened patiently to her, excited, rambling about school projects. Dan watched his daughter blossom and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Then, the alarm started. It was a Tuesday evening. Diana had just arrived for dinner, still in uniform. The emergency sirens cut through their conversation, followed immediately by Diana's communicator going off with urgent priority codes. She checked the display, and her face went white. Major offensive. Multiple Vraxian battle groups emerging across the sector. This isn't a raid. This is invasion-level force. She was already moving toward the door. Dan grabbed her arm. How bad? 17 battle groups. Maybe 300 ships total. They're hitting everything at once. Sentinel Prime, New Seattle, the mining colonies. All of it. She kissed him quickly. Get to the shelters. Now. Diana, I'll come back. Then she was gone, running toward the shuttle docks. Dan turned to find Lily, already pulling on her shoes. Come on, Dad. You heard her. They made it to the civilian shelter just as the first impacts hit. The station shuddered violently. Lights flickered. Parents pulled children close. Everyone watched the emergency displays, seeing the scope of the attack. It was worse than Dan had imagined. The Vraxians had committed everything to this push, throwing their full might at the human defenses. Diana's fleet was outnumbered 5-1. For 3 hours, Dan watched her fight the most desperate battle of her career. She was magnificent, coordinating with other commanders across the sector, moving her fleet in patterns that seemed impossible. But even tactical genius had limits against overwhelming numbers. Human ships fell. The destroyer Swift Judgment exploded on screen. The cruiser Pacific Dawn broke apart under concentrated fire. Each loss was announced in calm military tones that couldn't hide the horror of what they meant. Diana's flagship, Valiant, took heavy damage. Dan watched her shields drop to 30%, then 20%. She kept fighting, keeping her fleet between the enemy and the station's residential sections. She was protecting them again, at the cost of her own ship. The tactical display showed Sentinel Prime's defensive grid failing. Multiple breaches in the outer hull. Fires in 3 sectors. If the Vraxians pushed harder, if they focused their attack, the station would fall. Dan stared at the displays, his mind racing. He knew this station inside and out. He'd repaired dozens of sections, rebuilt structural supports, reinforced weak points. He understood the bones of this place in ways the military engineers didn't, and suddenly, he saw it. A solution that was completely insane but might work. He pulled up a station schematic on his tablet, overlaying it with the current ship positions. The Vraxians were in a tight formation, pressing their advantage, trying to break through to the docking bays. If they succeeded, they'd have direct access to the civilian areas. But the station wasn't just a static structure. It had positioning thrusters designed for orbital adjustments. If they fired those thrusters in a specific sequence, if they used the station's mass as a weapon, They could create a debris field that would disable the Vraxian formation. It would damage the station badly, but it wouldn't destroy it. Dan knew which sections could take the stress and which couldn't. He knew where the support structures were strongest, where they could afford to sacrifice. He knew this because he'd spent months crawling through those sections, reinforcing beams, replacing worn struts, understanding the skeleton that held this place together. "I need to contact Fleet Command," Dan said to the shelter supervisor. "Civilian lines are down. Military only. Then get me to someone military. Now. This is important." Something in his voice made the supervisor move. Within minutes, Dan was connected to the command center. A harried officer appeared on screen. "Sir, civilian channels are reserved for emergencies. This is an emergency. I need to speak to Commander Cross. Tell her Dan Cooper has a tactical solution. She'll take the call." Braying. The officer looked doubtful but must have seen something in Dan's face. He nodded and put Dan through. Diana appeared on screen, her face streaked with sweat and soot. Behind her, the bridge was chaos. Sparks flew from damaged consoles. Officers shouted coordinates. "Dan, what are you doing on this channel? I have an idea. It's crazy, but it might work. I don't have time. Listen to me. The station's positioning thrusters. If you fire them in sequence, you can use the station itself as a weapon. I know which sections can take the stress. I can give you exact coordinates for a controlled structural failure that will create a debris field right in their formation path." Diana stared at him. "You want to partially collapse the station. Not collapse. Controlled reformation. The damage will be contained to specific sections. I've worked on every one of them. I know their stress tolerances, their breaking points. Trust me. Dan, if you're wrong, we lose everything. If we don't try, we lose everything anyway. Your shields are at 18%. You can't hold much longer. This is our shot." Around Diana, her officers were listening. One of them pulled up a station schematic. "Commander, if he's right about the structural integrity, it could work. The debris field would be concentrated enough to disable their forward ships." Diana looked at Dan through the screen, and he saw the decision being made. She was weighing everything, the risk against the desperation of their situation. "Then," she nodded, "send me the coordinates. Exact firing sequence for the thrusters, and which sections will fail. You have 2 minutes." Dan's hands flew across his tablet. He pulled up every repair report he'd ever filed, every structural analysis he'd done. He calculated stress vectors, failure cascades, debris patterns. His knowledge of wood grain and stress points translated perfectly to metal and composite materials. He sent the data to Diana with 30 seconds to spare. "Got it," she said, reviewing his calculations. "This is insane. It'll work. I promise." She smiled grimly. "A carpenter and a commander. Who would have thought?" "I love you," Dan said. "Come back to us." "I will. Clear everyone from sectors 7 through 12. You have 5 minutes. The screen cut off. Dan turned to the shelter supervisor. "We need to evacuate sectors 7 through 12. Now. On whose authority?" "Commander Cross." "Move." The evacuation was chaos. People grabbed children and emergency supplies, flooding through corridors toward safer sections. Dan helped where he could, carrying an elderly woman, directing confused families. Lily stuck to his side, helping with younger children. They made it back to the main shelter with 1 minute to spare. Dan pulled Lily close and watched the displays. Diana's voice came through the speakers. "Calm, despite everything. All ships, fall back to defensive position Beta. On my mark, execute evasive pattern Delta. Station control, prepare thruster sequence." The human fleet scattered, pulling back in what looked like a retreat. The Vraxians pressed forward, scenting victory. "Station control, execute thruster sequence. Now." Sentinel Prime shuddered. The positioning thrusters fired in rapid sequence, pushing the massive station at angles it was never designed to move. Dan felt the structure groan around them, metal screaming under impossible stress. Sections 7 through 12 buckled exactly as he'd calculated. Support beams snapped in predetermined patterns. Hull plating tore free in controlled directions. The damage cascaded through non-critical areas, avoiding life support and core systems. A wave of debris exploded outward into the Vraxian formation. Ship-sized chunks of hull plating, structural beams moving at dangerous velocities, a cloud of smaller fragments that tore through enemy shields like bullets. The Vraxian formation shattered. Ships collided, trying to avoid the debris. Others took critical hits to engines and weapons. Their tight formation, their greatest advantage, became a death trap. Diana's fleet struck immediately, hitting the scattered enemy ships before they could regroup. It wasn't a battle anymore. It was a rout. The Vraxians broke and ran, retreating to subspace and whatever ships could still move. The whole thing took 8 minutes. When it was over, the human fleet had won the most decisive victory of the war. And Sentinel Prime, though damaged, still stood. The shelter erupted in cheers. People hugged strangers. Children cried with relief. Dan just held Lily and stared at the displays, unable to believe his plan had worked. 2 hours later, Diana found them. She was covered in soot and blood, limping from an injury. But alive. She walked straight to Dan and Lily, and the three of them stood there, holding each other while people cheered around them. "You did it," Diana said. "Your plan was perfect. We did it. Together. That's what humanity does, right? We adapt. We use every skill we have. Warrior and builder working together." Diana laughed, and it turned into a sob. "I was so scared. When those thrusters fired, I thought I'd sent you all to your deaths. But you trusted me. You trusted a carpenter's knowledge over military computers. Best decision I ever made." Lily pulled back to look at both of them. "You two are perfect together. I've been saying that for months." They both laughed through their tears. Around them, the station began the long work of recovery. Repair crews assessed damage. Medical teams treated wounded. Families reunited with tears and gratitude. But in that moment, Dan, Diana, and Lily were their own small unit. Found family, forged in crisis, stronger for having survived together. 6 months later, they stood on Sentinel Prime's newly repaired observation deck. The station bore scars from the battle, sections that had been rebuilt but would never quite match the original structure. Dan had helped with much of the reconstruction, applying his knowledge of stress and stability to military engineering projects. The wedding was small. A few dozen people, military and civilian mixed together. Patricia cried through the whole ceremony, claiming vindication for her matchmaking. Lily served as maid of honor, wearing her mother's locket and a new gift from Diana, a junior officer's commission that she could activate when she was old enough, if she chose. Diana wore her dress uniform. Dan wore a suit he'd borrowed from a friend. Neither of them cared about the formality. They cared about the promise they were making, to face whatever came next, together. "I never thought I'd do this," Diana said during the vows. "I thought I was too damaged, too focused on war, too scared of loss. Then I met a carpenter who taught me that broken things can be repaired. That patience and steady hands can create something beautiful. That the best things in life are worth the risk." Dan took her hands, warrior hands that had learned to be gentle with wood and with hearts. "I thought I was done with love. That losing someone once was enough pain for a lifetime. Then I met a commander who showed me that being strong means being vulnerable. That protecting others is an act of love. That heroes are human too." They kissed while their friends applauded. Lily was crying and smiling at the same time. At the reception, Dan and Diana cut the cake together. She held the knife wrong, applying too much pressure, and he gently adjusted her grip. Everyone laughed, but it was fond laughter. They'd all watched this relationship develop, seen the dragon lady soften, and the quiet Carpenter come back to life. Later, when the party was winding down, Dan found Diana and Lily together at the viewport, his wife and his daughter, talking about constellations and ship trajectories. His family, he joined them, and Lily pointed out a distant ship, a cruiser heading out on patrol. "That could be me someday," she said, "if I join the fleet." "Only if it's what you want," Diana said. "Not because of me. Maybe I could do both. Engineering and tactical. Build things and protect things, like you and Dad." Dan ruffled her hair. "You can be anything you want. That's what humanity does best. We don't limit ourselves to one thing. We adapt. We combine skills. We make impossible things possible." Diana leaned against him, and he wrapped his arm around her. Through the viewport, stars stretched endlessly, and somewhere out there, humanity was still fighting, still surviving, still building new futures against impossible odds. But here, in this moment, on this scarred but standing station, they had everything they needed. A carpenter who understood structure and stress, a commander who understood sacrifice and strategy, a child who would someday combine both their strengths into something new. They'd built this together, piece by piece, day by day, a family forged in the darkness of war, held together by trust and patience, and the very human need for connection. Diana had learned that life was more than duty and destruction. Dan had learned that hiding from loss meant hiding from life. Lily had learned that the best families were the ones you built, not just the ones you were born into. And humanity, in its small way, had learned once again what made it special in the galaxy. Not just weapons or tactics or technology, but the ability to take broken things and make them whole, to see potential in unexpected places, to combine different strengths into something greater than the sum of its parts. A warrior and a carpenter, the dragon lady and the quiet builder. Together, they represented everything humans were, everything they could be. Survivors who refused to just survive, warriors who remembered to be human, creators who understood that the most important thing you could build was connection. The war would continue. There would be more battles, more losses, more desperate hours. But whatever came next, they would face it together. And that made all the difference.